CPD Show. Welcome back to That CPD Show, and today my guest is Pastor Susan Hind. Susan is the senior leader of One Church in Leicester, along with her husband David. They came to Leicester to lead Trinity Life Church together in 2007 after serving 20 years in an AOG church in Nottingham. They are both deep lovers of Jesus, live people, and the presence of God. Susan is a Bible teacher carrying a prophetic gifting. She loves seeing people develop and grow in their faith, and she carries a heart of compassion and a passion for prayer. David and Susan have 2 sons and 3 granddaughters as well as a dog called Cova as well. Not COVID, Cova. Susan and David love food, music, exercise, laughing, and God's creation. Susan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Privileged to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. And I note from your bio that you love food, which is going to be an excellent thing given the topic of this podcast. Well, the topic, of course, is development, but the side dish is dessert. So we're going to dive into dessert first, and then we'll look at the 3 resources that you brought. What's your favorite dessert? What's the dessert that you brought with you today?
Well, plain and simple, and I haven't brought it, by the way. It would be nice to be licking one.
Well,
right.
It would be nice, yeah.
I love an ice cream.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, I love ice cream. Many people love ice cream. What have you got a specific angle on the ice cream that you really like? Is there a specific flavor or type of ice cream?
Yeah, I think I've got a few specific memories when I think about it. I think that stems from being brought up at the seaside. So my childhood days were spent in Whitley Bay, up in Northumberland on the coast. And many days I'd be sent down to the seafront with my sister of a summer afternoon, I think, to get us out from under our parents' feet. And we would always have a 10p at that time for an ice cream at the Venetian Cafe on Whitley Lodge seafront in Whitley Bay. So maybe it stems from that. But also I remember when I was a student in Nottingham, that's why I went to Nottingham originally, I remember this cafe called the Hot Brick Cafe. I don't know if it's around anymore, but it had roller skating waitresses, believe it or not.
Wow.
And their speciality was hot fudge ice cream sundaes. And I still sort of think, wow, when I think about that, that's lovely. But nowadays, to be honest, I think I weigh up the calories a little bit because, as you said, I love food, so I have to just watch it a little bit. So I usually go for a few scoops of the really nice sort of ice cream.
Okay. So nice, really nice ice cream. Have you got a specific brand? Are you a Haagen-Dazs? Are you what would be the best?
I think I really love it. You know, when you go on holiday and it's something like the Devon Farm.
Yeah.
To me, that sort of ice cream is like the very best. The favorite one I've ever had was actually ginger. It was like, and I've never found that again, but that was just delicious. But at home, if we're having a little treat, for me it will be one of those mini little, because we're a very little shopping family, mini little Magnum imitation.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's just enough, and I like the almond one. They're really lovely. I think it's Giatelli Gelati or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's right. I do like them in the summer. Oh, you're making me want to have summer. I've got a Christmas tree behind me, and now I'm thinking about summer and ice cream. So no, that
time of year that.
Well, yeah, anytime. I guess you're right. Any time of year. And when you said ice cream sundae, I was out with my family last night. My son, he's 6 years old. He decided that he was going to have the ice cream sundae for dessert, and the delight on his face when he had the ice cream was very good. So I think any kind of ice cream, it does sort of take you back to that kind of childhood thing, doesn't it? Which I love about it. Okay, that's brilliant, excellent. Ice cream, always a great choice. Thank you. That's brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about development now, and talk about your 3 favorite resources, or the ones you brought with you. And we're just going to talk about them one by one. So do you want to introduce us to your first resource?
Okay, well, my first resource, I really struggled choosing 3, by the way, but I felt let me just choose a couple of books that are really best friends to me, that I really love. And it's I find it very hard actually to recommend a book wholeheartedly. I don't know about you, because sometimes you always have a little bit of a reservation. Oh, I want to recommend this, but there's this little part of it that maybe I just want to balance. But this is a book that I think I can recommend without reservation. I think the content is great, and the writing is beautiful. And for me, that really matters. I really like a book that's really well written. And I find that stirs me, and it stirs my heart when I read it. And so I must have read this book many times. And I know people around me now in church, many people have read it many times. So to build it up anymore, it's How to Pray, a simple guide for ordinary people. I think, no, normal people. A simple guide for normal people. So if you consider yourself normal, this is a great guide for you. But it's just a wonderful book. I love it, and I think it's really impacted our church actually.
Well, I'd love to dive into it. I think my wife is reading it or has read it, and it's been sat on our
Yeah,
bookshelf somewhere, and I need to actually take the time to go and pick it out and read it.
yeah,
For those who've not read it, what does Pete Greig talk about? Well, I mean, obviously he's talking about prayer,
yeah.
but in that, what's the kind of the point that he's wanting to get forward in the book? What's that kind of précis of the book?
Well, as many people probably know, Pete Greig was the founder of the 24/7 prayer movement, I think around 25 years ago now. And the starting point, he says, for the book was that when they started, the book, he says, has been written over the last 25 years, really, but just put on print about 5 years ago. He said prayer is pretty much the most important thing in life. And he realized at the start of that movement that he and his friends were incredibly bad at it. That's what he says. So he basically uses the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, and goes through that, pulling out different strands and different aspects of prayer and writing into them for each part. There's also a little story. I love that. There's little stories along the way. For example, for intercession, there's the story of Count Zinzendorf, talks about him and the Herrnhut community and the Moravians and so on. So he brings a story from history or from modern day. When he talks about unanswered prayer, he has a story from Joni Eareckson Tada, listening, Amy Carmichael, and so on. But it's just very accessible book. I think it sets you off on an adventure. For me, it really, I mean, I've always loved prayer, but it whetted my appetite again to go deeper. And, you know, it doesn't go into great depth about any particular aspect of prayer, but just really, I think, like for me, with you talking about ice cream, sort of whets your appetite for going further and for having an adventure. And the fact that the prayer really is a great adventure with God, not just a you should sort of thing. Yeah, so that's sort of a little introduction to the book, but it basically goes through the Lord's Prayer, talks about, you know, the simple rhythms. So he talks about some rhythms of life, praying like our Rabbi Jesus. He talks about pausing, how to be still before God. Many things that have become really important to me recently, and I didn't really realize that some of the root of it till I looked at this again for this podcast. I didn't realize that some of the root of it is actually in this book already, and maybe that's where it sort of kick-started for me, some of my recent exploration into spiritual formation and so on. And then he talks about adoration. So he says some beautiful things, actually. I wrote down a little quote from the book about that. He says, like an eagle soaring, a horse galloping, or a salmon leaping, worship is the thing that God designed you to do. So I just think that's beautiful. And that's what I mean by his language is great. He talks about waking up our souls, how we do that, how we pray a psalm, about using different types of music, about using tongues, speaking in tongues, which is great because some books about prayer and that they miss all that out. So he talks all about the gifts of the Spirit as well. And then he talks about asking, petition, intercession, perseverance, and unanswered prayer, and then about contemplation, like coming back to me and God and me, and then eventually, hopefully, getting to the point of where we can just be all God in a moment, for at least a moment. And then coming back to listening at the end and realizing it's all about, you know, God initiates a conversation with us and we're to respond. as prayer is our response to that, and it's also listening to him. So
Yeah,
anyway, I probably said enough.
great. No, I mean, it sounds fantastically interesting. And I think for anyone, I think any Christian, you know, I think that I don't think there's a Christian that thinks, oh yeah, I've got my prayer life, you know, sorted. You know, everyone needs to grow in it, just like everyone needs to grow in reading the word. And so I think this book sounds like it's a great benefit. You mentioned that it's been impactful for your church. How has that, what impact has that had, and what are some of those things that you've seen brought about by implementing some of these things?
Yeah, well, I mean, even just very recently, we're about to set up a prayer, what we're calling a prayer tent in the back of our main hall at church, just like a prayer space that people can book out to come and pray in. And we're actually thinking, well, on the wall behind, we're going to have the acronym that he uses in his book. So that's just a very recent example, which is PRAY. So that's pause, rejoice, ask, and yield. So we're going to have 4 big posters behind, and then with some words that will just incite people's and encourage people in knowing how we can go into a time of prayer and actually spend an hour in prayer, for example. So that's very recent. But I was thinking back to when I first read this book, and I remember it was in COVID time, actually. I think that's when it first came out, or just after that. And I remember all of us had a bit more space probably to read at that point. I read it, and I remember meeting with a group of people on Zoom, some of our younger leaders, and talking through it. And then also we went through something called the prayer course, which is linked to this book. So he's also done a course, which is, and in the book, he sort of links the chapters with the course. So how you can actually read the book and do the course at the same time, which is like a video-based course with discussion. So it's not a writing down sort of course, although they encourage you to do journaling and so on. So it's very good for people's self-education, if you like. I know quite a lot of our small groups, we have a list of, as well as doing notes about our weekly messages, which we send out to all our small groups after a Sunday. We also give people freedom in the groups to sometimes go off and do a different course or a different resource. So we have a folder of resources as well that we offer to people, and the prayer course is on that as well. For our young adults ministry, we're finding that our young adults are very, very passionate to pray, and it's really encouraging their passion for the presence of God. We're seeing a lot of young adults at the moment finding Jesus for the first time, and even from very beginnings of being Christians, they are like really wanting to connect with God, hungry to meet with him on their own and together. So that we're finding there's prayer groups springing up. We're finding that in our YA small groups, which people are very keen to get into the small groups, prayer has become an important part of that. And our YA gathering which is on a Monday night, they are actually studying prayer at the moment. So they've done a whole term, different speakers, different panels and discussions as well, and times of pressing into God together. So I would say across the church, this book has had an influence, even if it's more an influence in my life and David, my husband's life as well, and how that sort of like filtered down into the church as a whole.
Fantastic. Okay, so that is How to Pray by Pete Greig, an excellent book, I think, that, and our church also does the prayer course and offers that. So recommend that to all church leaders, all ministers as well. Should we go on to your second resource? What's the second one that you brought with you?
A little bit different. So I haven't actually brought this. I can't hold it up at the screen. But I was just thinking, to balance that, so this is something that enables us to be relevant as leaders and aware of and impacting the world around us. And none of us have got time as pastors really to do a lot of digging into the news, becoming very aware of what's going on. We can read the news, but we're becoming really aware of what's going on in the world from a Christian perspective, doing the research, and the education. So it's great that we've got organizations that do that for us. So I'm thinking of, EA, Evangelical Alliance, and, we're partners with CSW. It's great to get their stuff through about the worldwide freedom to worship and so on. But I just wanted to highlight one, which is the Care website and the weekly Friday email, because I think they have impacted me quite a lot. Care obviously stands for Christian Awareness, Research and Education. And the website is very informative on all different levels, but the weekly email I find very helpful because it comes on a Friday, and it's just really good to bring to the top of your mind even if you just skim read it, it's some of those issues that we need to be aware of, that we need to be maybe encouraging our church in even taking action on, or thinking through prayerfully, and so on. They often talk about the bigger, better story, which I really like. This is the story here, but there's a bigger, better story, which is God's story about the world and about our society and how we look at stuff. Obviously, it's very relevant today because on the day we're recording this, Kim Ledbetter's end of life bill is going into Parliament today for its second reading. And we found it really helpful, just to give a recent example on that level. We found Care to be very helpful as a church, just because it gave us a very easy way to encourage the church a few weeks ago to email our MPs with ready-made letters that you could just tweak and so on, just click, and you could do it in a couple of minutes at the most. It was also very good just giving prayer points and prayer resources, thinking about prayer again, because they have this set of 7, I think it's something like 7 ways to pray for all these different areas. So one of them was assisted suicide. So we used that in our staff prayer, for example, and found it very helpful in our we have a weekly Zoom church prayer army. So we found it very helpful in that. Just lots of really useful things that you would take a long time to research and get done. And they've done it for you already. Just some of the things that they research into are things like gambling, online safety, pornography, exploitation, abortion, marriage, family, all those sort of issues. I think it's just, I personally find it very helpful, and I'm very thankful that we have these great organizations that bother to do this, so that Christians can stand up at the right time and say the right things and do it together.
Talk to me about that, because I think for church ministers, that getting that balance between engagement in public affairs and not going too far, getting that balance is always, it seems like it's a difficult one to achieve. Talk to me about how maybe the Care website helps you, and how church leaders can stay engaged with what's happening in public life, in what's happening in the news, in a way that's I guess honoring to God, but in the responsibility we have as church leaders.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting balance, because I think obviously our main focus as church is growing disciples, isn't it? So it's, Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. So it's, we're bringing people to Jesus to follow Jesus, but also we're here to make a stand in our, these important moments, like the moment today. It is very important that we at least show an awareness of that and are saying something about it, because these are moments that can change the course of our country and can change a nation. And I think it is a very watershed sort of moment, wherever that bill goes today. I think we can overdo it. So I think maybe there's context in which we wouldn't be speaking too much with the church about issues all the time. But I think we've also got to be informed and aware, so that we can, speak intelligently about it and guide people, because many people are coming into the church and coming to be Christians without any realization, I think, that there's an awful lot of commonly spoken, I don't know, things that are publicly accepted and just seen as, oh, that's true, which actually aren't necessarily true. Like, for example, you can just choose what gender you're going to be, that sort of thing. That's your choice, and nobody can take those choices away from you. And I think it's important that these are quite fundamental things because they do affect also people's lives within our church. And most people in the world make up their decisions dependent on how it's impacted them personally, don't they? Or how they emotionally feel about it. And that can come from all sorts of different sources. But even my MP, when I wrote to my MP about the assisted suicide, I had a letter back saying that he would be voting for the assisted suicide proposal because of things that had happened in his own family, which, you know, we've got to be careful that we are putting a different point of view, that actually the bottom line is the truth. And the bottom line is the truth of the Bible. And I think if we see our role as pastors as being to also teach the Bible and help people to apply the Bible. So we're not just teaching it up here, we're teaching it, okay, so how does that apply into this situation and that situation in our life? So I think if we never address those things, then people just almost will compartmentalize and they'll just have one view that's like the worldview they're going along with. And then they have their Sunday Christian sort of view of different things. So I think it is important, but it can be a bit of a downer. We don't want to be like always talking about those issues every single moment we're talking to people. But I do think it's important, and I do know that we believe, don't we, that the Bible is relevant for every single age, and the Bible endures forever. So the things that God says, we need to dig into that. And actually, that's something that I found Care very helpful on, because they have a biblical perspective, sort of, on when you look on the different issues. They've usually got some sort of video or some written article, which is the biblical perspective on this issue. They released one, the biblical perspective on assisted suicide, for example, and it was very enlightening. So yeah, is that enough on that one?
No, that's great. That's great. And so that website, the Care website, what's the address if people want to go and find that?
Oh, yes, I haven't written it down. It's care.org, I think it is. I can look at
Care.org.
the phone if you want.
No, that's fine.
Care.org.uk.
Care.org.uk. Fantastic. Okay, well, make sure if you're a minister watching this, listening to this, make sure that you check out that website. And I think it's really important that we're engaged with what's happening in the world, and we find appropriate ways to be able to speak about it and disciple people through these environments. So, and I think seems that Care would be an excellent website for that. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on to your final resource. What's the final one you brought with you?
Final one is another of my favorite books. I think many years ago I preached a message in our church. When we were very new to Leicester, and I remember using this book as a resource, and ever since it's really deeply impacted me, because I've always loved Psalm 23, but this is a little book by Phillip Keller. It's called A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. And that enduring image of a shepherd and sheep, it stays with me as a person. So I find every day I'm saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need. That's one of my classic things I just say every day, because sometimes we need to know, don't we? Mm-hmm. That we have everything we need. I remember sitting with somebody just after we came to Leicester and feeling very inadequate it was the first time, because I was a teacher before we came here, and this was the first time I'd ever been in ministry like full time. And to be honest, there were times where I didn't know what to do. And I remember this lady saying to me, you know, the Lord is your shepherd, you have everything you need, just go to his cupboard. It's like he's got a store cupboard, you know, go to the cupboard and receive whatever you need for the day. And that's just always stayed with me, that he goes ahead of me, he prepares the way, and I have everything I need. So I think this is a great book for us just to know. And Phillip Keller was a shepherd. So he was a shepherd, I think it says on the back where he was, in East Africa. But so he experienced shepherding in a similar way to what they would in the Middle East when Jesus was around, and when David wrote the Psalm 23, like the shepherding where the shepherd goes ahead of the sheep and so on. But he understands shepherding, ranching, all that those sorts of images. So he unpacks the Psalm. It's a very simple little book. It's a lovely book to have by your bedside or whatever. But he unpacks the Psalm really bit by bit, phrase by phrase, and just tells it from a shepherd's point of view. And it is, to me, is so powerful, and got many powerful images in which will help us, but also help people we pastor. So I think going back from care now to like individual pastoring of people or groups of people, or encouraging the pastors who work with us, there's not many situations you can go into where Psalm 23 isn't relevant. In fact, I don't think there's any. In fact, even yesterday, David, my husband, went to visit the mum of one of our staff members who's about to pass away. And what does he read? Well, he reads Psalm 23 with her, and talks about it and prays into it. And I just think, this to read this, it takes the pressure off us as under pastors, because actually Jesus is the shepherd. He's the one in charge, and he looks after the sheep. It helps us live lightly. But also, I just feel this, there's nothing in here that wouldn't help somebody who's in our flock, if you like. I feel like I can give you a few examples, but you might want to ask me something else. I don't know.
Well, no, I'd love to hear some examples of that, and because it's let's dive into some examples if you've got some of those. Yeah.
So he talks about the Lord is my shepherd, and he's the Lord. So he just unpacks like you would as a teacher, so I love it, I suppose, because I like teaching. So he says, the Lord, the Lord is my shepherd. So the one who's our shepherd is the creator, the sustainer. He's the name above every other name, the King of Kings. He has real power, and he is my shepherd. So he talks about mine, and he tells a little story about when he first bought his first flock, and the feeling he had that they were so precious because he'd laid down his life. He'd literally saved for this flock of sheep. He says he bought them with his blood, sweat, and tears. And so he would continually lay his life down for them. And apparently sheep, we tend to think, oh, sheep, you just let them out in a field, you see them on the hills in Wales and places like that, and you just let them out there and they're just doing their own thing, eating the grass. You don't need to give them much care. But he says, actually, that is not true at all, because sheep are some of the most needy animals in the world. And he said he constantly would be laying his life down for the sheep. It would cost him sleep. It cost him, blood, sweat, and tears. And also he would mark them to say that they were his. So that's another thing, they're mine. The Lord is our shepherd. So like a farmer marks this, you see the sheep with a mark on the back saying whose farm they belong to. We can also say we were marked obviously with a seal, it says in the Bible, the Holy Spirit. And I just find some of those pictures, I love pictures, but some of those things we can really use as well to help other people, to help them to just grasp, what it is Jesus has done for them. Apparently, another example would be how easily sheep are scared. And so many people, dare I say, even us sometimes, have fear or cannot rest. And he says he lets me rest in green meadows, green pastures. But apparently a sheep with a shepherd, they won't lie down unless they're free from fear, because they're very easily scared, unless they're free from friction with others. They have this thing called the butting order, apparently, which he talks about, which is like the pecking order with chickens, but there's a butting order with sheep. So they like butt each other out the way, and then they have a top sheep, and then they have a hierarchy. So amazing, really.
I had no idea there was a sheep hierarchy. This is brand new news to me.
They apparently have the top sheep, like with all the muscles and everything, that's butted everyone else out the way. But they won't lie down unless they're free from fear. They're free from like friction with the other flock members. They're free from pests. So the pests will get in their head, and they get under their fur, and not their fur, is it? What is it? Their fleece. Unless they're free from hunger. And the shepherd is the one who does all the sorting out for the flock. So he sorts out the friction with the other sheep. He frees them from pests. He feeds them. He puts them in good pasture and so on, so that then they can rest. And I think that's a lovely picture, really, just to think that Jesus is the one, the good shepherd, who will help us to rest, because he deals with all those aspects of our life. And particularly the one about the pests, that really spoke to me, I remember, because apparently there are these flies which get into a sheep's ear and they actually burrow into their brain and they lay their eggs in their brain. And it can drive them so mad that they will actually butt their head against a branch or a tree or something and can actually die. And when it talks about he anoints my head with oil, apparently these larvae that may even climb up through the nose and so on, the shepherd looks for signs of that, and he puts oil on the sheep's head, and apparently that deals with these nose flies, that because otherwise they I suppose the oil stops them getting up the nose. And to me, it's things like that, you know, that picture of, okay, if we're plagued by anxious thoughts or niggling things that won't go away or things that destroy our peace, the good shepherd wants to come and deal with those damaging insects, if you like, in our head. And he says, let me anoint your head with oil. So all those pictures, I think, are really beautiful. And I think they remind us as well of what a wonderful privilege it is, what a privilege it is to pastor the flock of God, if you like, to actually be like that good shepherd, but to be under shepherds with him, the great shepherd, and to shepherd on his behalf. I just think that is amazing.
And lots of a really quite wonderful imagery there, and things I'd never knew, because obviously I'm not a shepherd. You know, not a literal shepherd, you know. But I think there's so much that we can learn, and I think I've been something I've been wondering about recently is thinking about that, the nature of shepherding. And we talk a lot about leading, and obviously that's great, and we need all of that. But sometimes when we talk all about leading, we forget what that means, that in the context of shepherding, which is the biblical example. How has that affected, you know, how has this book affected how you lead, how you how that we need leadership in church? Of course we do, absolutely. But how has this book helped you think about that kind of shepherding as well?
I think we need to lead with love always, don't we? So, you know, we can talk about leading. Sometimes I think we maybe separate leading and pastoring, don't we? And they really are together. And even if we are a senior leader, like David and I now are senior leaders of a church, so we have a staff team, and quite a lot of our time is spent with the people who are actually doing some of the pastoring, and people who are leading ministries with young people or children or seniors, or are leading our sites and so on. But even in that, I think every time we connect with an individual person, we should be thinking like a shepherd, because in the end, we're leading them to the last verse, which is, you know, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. We want our people to be blessed, and we want them to be a blessing. And I can tell you a bit about that actually from this book in a minute, because that's brought something else to mind, which is, I think, great. But also, even with our staff team and so on, I think we lead, and yes, we have standards, and you want to expect excellence from people and so on. And I think we always do it with love. We always have to do it with love. And even if we're having to have a hard conversation, I think it's good to always try, and I will always try to do that also as a shepherd, and to always bring a level of encouragement as well. And even if you wanting somebody to go away and make a change, or you're challenging something, you're doing it with the heart of a shepherd, because ultimately you want their good, and you want the best for them. The thing I was going to say about the blessing is, at the end of the psalm, it says, goodness and love will pursue me, or goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Apparently, if a flock of sheep is well shepherded, they leave a blessing on the land. So the land behind them gets blessed. So if we want the land that we are in, if you like, the city we're in, or the town or village, to be blessed, if we look after our flock, they will leave a blessing. Because how do sheep leave a blessing? Really through their excrement, apparently, because they're poo. They poo on the ground, and apparently it really enriches the earth. And if a shepherd doesn't let the sheep like overgraze a certain part of the grass, they take them to new pastures, and they watch over them well, the land itself gets blessed. And I think that is a biblical principle, isn't it, that throughout the whole Bible, that you are blessed to be a blessing. We continually are a blessing to our flock, and we see them as, you know, beloved sheep, and we want the very best for them, and whatever is the most relevant, even from Psalm 23, that will bless their life, even if it's a challenge, you know, even if it's the rod, if you like, the rod and the staff. But the rod, which is authority, and the staff, which is the drawing close and looking after, then, you know, then you're going to also bless everybody around, and they will be a blessing.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's just such a great image of what it means to lead and pastor a church, and I had no idea about the blessing that, you know, that leaves. That's a fantastic illustration. I'm sure that'll make a very good preach illustration at some point. Susan, thank you so much.
Preach on poo before, so that will be
exactly. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed diving into those 3 resources. That's How to Pray by Pete Grieg, the Care website with the weekly email, and A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23 by Phillip Keller. Brilliant. And also to talk about ice cream as well. Always a delight to talk about ice cream. So yeah, Susan, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm sure I'll catch you very soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.